Classic is this thing on the moment? I think it is. I do believe it is. So, right, it's time for some saucy gaming history. First one, so it goes awful, and it doesn't really matter because I'm the one that's playing. And let's face it, I have no self-respect, so this is fine. But who really minds about that when you have such wonderful music in the background? So relaxing. So, rights reserved and copyrighted 1989 Maxis, copyright 1991 Nintendo, and licensed to Nintendo. Yes, this is SimCity Classic, the proper SimCity, not the new one, which I believe I was in the minority of actually smartly enjoying. So SimCity Classic, this is the SNES version. This isn't the version that most people will necessarily be familiar with. The SNES version came out in 1991, as you can see, after the various variations between 1989 and 1990 that came out. For those of you unfamiliar, SimCity hit the joys of the, let's see, there was the PC in 1989 on MS-DOS, 1989 on the Amiga. I think there was a 1991 Amiga version as well, I want to say. But then there was the Amstrad CPC in 1990. For those of you that are familiar, of course, you'll know that's Alan Sugar's technological company, which is very famous for its video phones. What else was it on? It was on the BBC Micro. I remember the BBC Micro because every school had one, and we weren't lucky enough to have SimCity. We had Secret Garden on our single BBC Micro for the entire classroom. The BBC Micro version was phenomenal. I'll go into that in a bit. But then we eventually get... Oh yes, there was a ZX Spectrum version as well. Yes, and of course Macintosh, when Macintosh was actually still popular. Long before the days of, well, I'm a PC. But this is the 1991 version for the Super Nintendo, which is very, very different to its peers and is vastly superior in every last single way. Those of you that have never played the original SimCities will be probably a little bit confused as to how a console version could be better. It's actually really quite simple. The SNES version, as you can see here, I'll load it up. Map select. Well, this was a joy from the start. Many of the other versions of SimCity didn't have any variation of map select. Some had kind of random generated, some pulled from, if I remember correctly, various map files. But the SNES version, you get to put in your digits like this, and I don't know if they're procedurally generated based on the number or decompressed from a file, but either way you had 999 odd maps that you could enjoy. It was an actual genuine pleasure. We'll try number 63, that's a good number. So for those of you that don't know, obviously, as I said, this was out in 1991, and unlike many of the other versions which were just straight up ports, we'll call this L2 stream, the SNES version was actually developed by Nintendo. Nintendo, who purchased the rights and then sent it off to their Nintendo EAD wing. Hence why the other versions don't have such happy and cheerful music, whereas the SNES version has wonderful, happy, charming music all the way through. And in fact, Nintendo took the basic concept of SimCity. Let's pause this a second so I can go over it with you. Lovely first thing about the SNES version, the menus are really easy and intuitive. This will be familiar for anyone who's ever seen the older versions of SimCity. So you get your basic bulldozer, a road, mass transit, power line, a park. Already, as you can see, this is utterly fascinating. Residential areas, back when residential areas were just residential areas and there was no differentiation between low, medium and high that you could purchase. Is it dense? Is it not? You get no say in the matter. Commercial, industrial, police, fire, a stadium, a seaport, coal power, nuclear power and an airport, which will cost half my entire funds. So this is the basics of SimCity. For those of you that have never played it, build a nuclear reactor because it's clean and people won't complain. Build a road and start plonking down some industrials. Why industrials, you ask? Because everyone else will have a shit fit over the fact they're living by a power station. Size well be, this is not. So this is, again, as I said, the SNES version, and it is by far the most superior version. It has a full spectrum of colour. Those that were unlucky enough to play on certain versions, like say the Macintosh version that I remember off the top of my head, had to play in black and white and with very, 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 very tiny definitions of what was what. On top of that as well, let's build some more industrial. What other versions were there that were absolutely terrible to look at? As I remember it, the BBC Micro was a miracle because the BBC Micro was, even in comparison to machines at the time, very, very basic. It wasn't awful by any stretch of the imagination, but it had very, very low memory. And so the fact that a game like SimCity could run on a BBC Micro is, in fact, like, absolutely phenomenal. It really was like a marvel of its time. But then Nintendo came along and decided they were going to make their own version, and in every way they made the actual game enjoyable. First of all, we have the UI. The UI on every other version was pretty lame, to be honest. It was very difficult to manage, very difficult to operate in general. But the SNES version is just simple, move over, click, select, done, and you don't even really miss having a mouse, largely because your computer isn't screaming at you going, my god, why are you running this on me? Old computers at the time did not enjoy this game, as I recall. Ooh, I have made an error. I've put residential in the middle, and I've made another error because I'm not paying attention. But yeah, no, the development of SNES version is actually quite interesting. From what I can make out from what I've read up, Nintendo wanted to have not necessarily a killer app from the PC, but just wanted to have something to test their R&D teams, as well as give them something novel for everyone to play. So they weren't necessarily interested in porting every game over, although they did make a very fine port of Doom over onto the SNES, as I recall. But SimCity was the obvious fit, which at the time seemed like an absolute godsend, because Nintendo being Nintendo, you just knew you were going to get a good game. And it really was. As you can see here, it's very simple, very intuitive, much like the other versions of SimCity. It looks similar, but it just had simple quality of life improvements over it. In the old versions, you had to put up a really, really terrible window to see what the value of land was. In this one, simply click the little magnifying glass, and a real feat of technological achievement here. Sounds peculiar. The circle, as you can see, shows in the top right, we'll take for example, half and half. Half being the background, half being the value underneath. Real technological advancements that would have made your Commodore C64 explode. Like, Nintendo did a really good job. They redid the music. Not only did they redo the music, but some versions had none at all. So this was lovely, relaxing, simple music. And the sound effects are completely inoffensive, unlike the, again, going back to the BBC Micro version, which goes... Yeah, that's the closest I can make to replicating the sound effects, and I sound like a complete tool, but you get the premise. It was just... Ooh, it was painful to listen to. It was just... It hurt. It hurt every second of the day. But the SNES version I came across probably about the mid-90s. There's a lovely little place that people won't necessarily remember if they're too young in Norwich called Second Hand Land, and in the glory days it had two shops either side of the road, and one side had a lovely selection of imported SNES games. And this is in an era whereby, and people complain about the price of games now, I remember Super Street Fighter being £65 in Electronics Boutique. Ooh, very quickly, this is unique to the SNES version. The SNES version I picked up in second-hand land for a tenner, and I was overjoyed because every time I got a little bit bigger, it came with a lovely little splash screen. You have here Dr. Wright, exclusive to the SNES version, announcing you now have a town. And as a result, down here, in around about a minute or so, give it time, takes a few seconds to think, and there we go. Where would you like to build your own house? Which seems like just a normal feature in every SimCity thereafter, but it was actually an invention of the SNES game. Now, I'm not going to purport to know whether or not Will Wright had anything to do with this, or it was a Nintendo invention, but certainly it was the SNES version, which was the first one to have a full reward system in it. And so, unlike the PC version, and the ZX Spectrum version, and the Hell version known as the BBC Micro version, you actually felt like you were making progress. It's a funny story about, it's not a funny story at all, about SimCity. Originally, I believe it was pitched, from what I remember in my research, in the mid-1980s. I think Will Wright finished it in either 85 or 86, and pitched it to as many companies as possible. And everyone turned around and went, well, there's no sign of progress, no sign of like an end goal, an achievement, a win. You cannot win this game. So what's the point taking it on? Because there'll be no sense of achievement, no one will want to buy it. And they weren't necessarily entirely wrong. However, the president of Maxis, which at the time was a small company, went, do you know what? We will have a punt, because we're just lovely, nice people who have yet to be taken over by EA and completely change our work ethos. And so, SimCity was born. And this is in an era where we did not know the torture of what would happen if a franchise really took off. So, after SimCity came the various ports, and at the time we all loved ports because it meant that eventually it would appear on something and actually be playable. But then we had the offshoots. We had, SimCopter, SimAnt. Yes, you could simulate the life of an ant. I never played it, never really wanted to. No surprise really as to why. I do remember Streets of SimCity though, and I'm sure, like, I was thinking about this earlier. Mentioned it to myself in my mad ramblings to myself earlier. I am certain that in that one you had to fight criminal gangs, or at least chase them off the streets. Like, we're talking proper violent criminal gangs. So a family game it was not. Unlike this, which is very, very much... Oh, there is my train. It will take approximately a year to go from one end to the other, probably. Oh, and I've mucked up again. The only problem with SNES controls. But, yeah, no, this led to an entire series of offshoots, which eventually, as we all know, culminated into the beautiful, wonderful game known as The Sims. Its even better sequel, Sims 2. And then its sequels, we'll just leave it at Sims 3 and Sims 4. Although I must say I'm very impressed with Sims 4 building. But back then, this was the absolute pinnacle of creation, and unbelievable it was. People could not imagine that this was actually possible on their home consoles. And Nintendo didn't stop with just like the basic additions, like having the idea of something to progress with. No, 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 no. They included an advisor in the form of Dr. Wright. Advisors and press reports were in the original SimCity versions, depending on what platform you're playing on. But this had Dr. Wright based off of Will Wright, with his lovely, beautiful green hair and lovely background music, which, again, from my research reading earlier, I take no responsibility for how reliable this is, as this was stolen from Wikipedia, as it's the only place I could find the information. The soundtrack was composed by Soyo Oka. I've probably ruined that. But yes, no, she composed, or he composed, they composed, I just assumed someone's gender, the track, or the various tracks, and it's much better for it. It's such a beautiful masterpiece of SNES hardware. And it's not just those that are the inventions in this as well. Simple things like the bank. The idea that you can take a loan to further develop your town or city. I mean, It's not here yet, but it would appear here when you develop into a city and have a pop. Oh, we are actually nearly there. 9,000. Oh, it's getting tense. We are nearly there. But the bank would appear, and you could obviously at that point go, I would like some of your sweet, sweet monies, and they would go, okay. Novel invention. Did not appear, as far as I know, in any of the other SimCities. So this really was a trendsetter for the entire franchise. And really the only conclusion you come out of it straight away is, please, 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 EA, give Nintendo the license back for SimCity, because they will do the best job. Progression. As mentioned earlier, unique to the SNES, you really do feel like you're progressing because it makes a big deal of it. It mentions it in the other games, but in the SNES one, you really feel like you're going somewhere. For those of you that never played SimCity before as well, you may wonder why on earth I'm doing a 3x3 grid of residential, commercial, and industrial. The joy of SimCity, everything has to be within 3 tiles of a road for it to have access to something. So in fact, actually at the moment, my fire department has no access. Oh, I can build a bank. Where shall I put the bank? Maybe let's put it in the middle of the residential area, so that way then, if they steal all the money, the civilians can unduly riot, justified or not. But yeah, no, Nintendo made massive innovations, and in fact, being developed by Nintendo EAD as well, they included things like, oh, I'm gonna regret this now. The disasters were in all the previous versions of SimCity. So you had a plane crash, tsunami, fire, tornado, earthquake, and Godzilla. Except in the SNES version, Godzilla is a bit different. That's not Godzilla, that's Alone, which is still a monstrous thing to undertake. But you would trigger what you would think in the SNES version of SimCity is just a nice, simple Godzilla moment. And no, it's Bowser. And look at Dr. Wright, he is scared. And that mini Bowser on wheels chasing after him. It's almost like a little Robo Bowser. So cute. And yet there was never a Nintendo toy of it. I feel disappointed. And so this is a terrible place for Bowser to appear. I am going to lose my entire town because he will wreck everything. Oh, I am big enough for a park or a casino. This is not the time. Bowser is casually marching through town destroying everything, but the people would like an amusement park. Difference between amusement park and casino. Amusement park gives you a small amount of income every month, and it's just generally a good thing. The casino gives you large amounts of income, but on the other hand, everyone turns to crime and tries to sell their mothers, because that is a normal thing you do in order to fund your gambling habit. So, I cannot build my present, for I do not have the funds. Oh, he has gone away. Goodbye, Bowser. Goodbye. You stay away from downtown. But yeah, that's basically SimCity in a nutshell. It's very peculiar when you play the SNES version compared to the other versions, because you're not playing it on a tiny screen that you can barely see. For anyone that is actually curious, 320 by 200 resolutions were things that would have been used in a lot of games at the time. But from what I remember, I don't think there was much in the way of SimCity versions that ran anything that small. Nothing like your 1080p's. Oh, Bowser has gone. But yeah, no, like, SimCity was a marvel. Back in the day, we used to love most ports, and you would eventually find a good port. There were some terrible ones. The BBC Micro port in 1990 was just awful. As mentioned many, many times, not that I was mentally scarred by that at all when I eventually managed to find a copy of it and try it out for the first time, all excited because that was my childhood and that was the computer we had in school, and it ruined it. It ruined it, much like a troubled memory of visiting an aunt at Christmas. And anyway, before we go into that dark topic, the There's nothing dark about it. I just have social anxiety, and so therefore I hate seeing my relatives. No, I don't hate it. But yes, this is essentially what you would look at on the SNES version, whereas everything else, imagine it half the size for the other versions. Other games were not so fortunate in their SNES ports. Where Nintendo did such a beautiful job of this, there were some real clangers. It may surprise you to find out there was actually a version of Civilization on the SNES, and whilst most people would jump for joy and assume that it was a wonderful thing, it really was not. I almost don't want to spoil it because I think I could cover that in another video, but when I say it's an absolute nightmare of a game, I cannot describe how much of a nightmare it is. I think I would have to run a stream where I play a little bit of the original PC version and then subject people to the horror of the SNES version. It was... Who made the SNES version, I wonder? I will have to look that up for when I do a video on it. There we go. We have video number 2, Civilization, and you will cry when your entire childhood is ruined. Wow, like, this is... Yeah. I'm just thinking back now and I can't focus on SimCity because Civilization was awful. The golden era of the Super Nintendo had some beauties and some clangers. Some beauties and some clangers. And now let us never talk of the Mega Drive. But yes, that's SimCity for you. We'll do just another generic bit of playthrough now. And then if I can remember anything else worth mentioning, I think I will. The one problem with SimCity of the era, although yes I could take a loan, the loan would be extortionate. As you can see here, we'll go to it. Payments will be $500 a year for the next 21 years. What a deal. No, you actually cannot pay that loan off unless you are an exceptionally large city, maybe around about 150, 200,000 people before you can start effectively paying off that loan with taxes. Otherwise, you tend not to put in enough year on year because you're very quickly about... Oh, blackout. Other thing you have to look out for is you want to try and address things before... Oh, I don't have the money for a new power plant. If you don't address things before they become serious issues and occur city-wide, you get our lovely little friend Dr. Wright. Oh, that was such a happy little ditty tune. Yes, I know it's inadequate because it doesn't cover the entire city. I can't help it. Fine, you shall have your rail. It shall come here. There. Now see how you feel about that. Residents can demand all they want for a stadium. They aren't getting one. We are broke. Yes, after a time, when things start occurring, you start seeing more and more brownouts across the city, Dr. Wright will rear his ugly head, and he won't go away. Every 2 months he'll be there, like a very, very, very annoying little side character from Persona 5 that I'm not going to name, who constantly tells you to go to bed. Just so you know, the crime rate is high. Just so you know, the crime rate is high. The crime rate is high. The crime rate is high. And the worst bit is, you can't be angry at him because with that beautiful Nintendo touch that only Nintendo can do, you have wonderful little animations of an angry little robber chasing him, and yet you think, ah, isn't that adorable? Such adorable crime and the threat of gun violence. Because yes, Nintendo did not shy away from that aspect and included a... Oh, my train is on fire. Bowser has undone me by proxy. Right, let's isolate this very quickly. Nothing you had to do back in the day, isolate fires. Like this. The simple way. There was no other way of doing it. The fire service wouldn't deal with it. The fire service were terrible. The people complain, but they don't actually do much. Probably help if I had a direct road to them, but never mind. Oh, here we go. Look at him. I didn't even know it was coming, but look at him. He's so adorable. Run, Dr. Wright, run. Yeah, they have police stations. It's not my fault. Oh, sorry, poor people, but you are going to have to move out. Oh, I can't demolish them. Yay! I'm already actually raking in a lot more than I thought it would. That's rare. Normally it would go horribly. Oh, I've made an error. Well, guess I'm just nuking everything. And starting from scratch. Right, so let's have that come there. And the train station you pick up from there. There we go. Everyone's happy now until they're eventually not. But that little Nintendo charm, the little ditty music, the little happiness as you play, something that only Nintendo can do. Although the fire stations don't do jack. And it's not without its faults. As I recall, there is a cheat to end up with maximum money very, very easily. Just simply have no money in the bank, so demolish randomly until you have 0, and then drop all your tax. There's probably something more to it, but I never use it, so I don't really know. I believe there was a hidden debug menu from what I was reading up earlier that actually was only discovered in the mid-2000s, so fair enough, that was actually well hidden. There's all kinds of little tricks and treats for this version that have only just come to light recently, really. I mean, it's just such a well manufactured version, because it is manufactured, obviously, with like a limited amount of love, but more love from Nintendo than, say, certain other companies would give it now. EA. No, I love EA. I just don't love all their business practices. But yes, so now only the police here are stranded. But the people didn't need the police anyway, so it's fine. Only a small crime rate. Let's have a look at the value. This technological marvel. Look at this. Marvellous for the time. Really innovative. You wouldn't have seen many PC games do that. They would have struggled. So beautiful, the layering. But yes, such is the joy of SimCity. There's not really much else I can think of now. Let's just enjoy for a few minutes before we end the joy that is SimCity's beautiful music, while my town gracefully burns to the ground. Well, that's not the disaster we were looking for, but that also works. Fun fact. Apparently, our lovely little cool developer of this game, I see, look, cute little animation, was really big on mass transit, and so he deliberately made traffic jams absolutely terrible for towns because he wanted to promote mass transit, supposedly. So the story goes. Now, where are my disasters? Here we go. A fire has broken out because someone forgot to stop cooking their pot noodle in the oven. Because that is the normal way we cook pot noodles. Oh, that is not a disaster, that is just a traffic jam. And away we go into silence as it sings us out. And now we watch the city burn.